This show is about your mental health. While it's supported by the pillars of positivity and hope, if you find yourself in crisis, please reach out for help. In many communities in both the United States and Canada, you can dial 211 to be connected to mental health and crisis services in your region. While it may seem like it at times, you are not alone. Stress and anxiety are feelings. They don't show up on an X-ray. Surgery can't remove them. That doesn't stop our body from converting those feelings into physical manifestations. Where do you feel anxiety? Does your chest tighten? Does your heart beat faster? Do you break out in a sweat? While this physical reaction is stress-related, it may also work the other way in helping you reduce or even control your anxieties. The Sixth Sense of Mental Health, right now on The Happy Molecule. Dr. Michael Mantz is an integrative psychiatrist. His approach to better mental health is a holistic one. He works with his clients to use their five senses to feel, see, hear, and yes, even taste and smell their anxiety. But the purpose is not just to perceive these inner feelings, but to actually use them to take action. He joins me from his office in Santa Barbara, California. Integrative psychiatry, tell me about that.
Well, it was something that was kind of born out of the idea where I came from a background before I went to medical school. I actually had a master's degree in herbal medicine, so I have this more Eastern kind of holistic view of the body. That's kind of like they look at it from a systems-based approach, rather than the Western approach was more of a reductionistic style, where we just sort of look for the one area that's hurt and then look for the silver bullet to fix it. Integrative actually takes both, because what I've noticed for a lot of people is that they'll fall into these two camps, and we see this in other things like in politics. It's sort of this polarization effect that happens where people say on the holistic side will be like, well, all medicines are poison and dangerous and don't touch them, and then other people on the Western medicine side will say, well, all like supplements and herbs, that they're all bull crap, they don't work, there's no legitimacy to anything. Integration kind of takes a look at, well, let's have an open mind. Let's take a look at what works on both sides of the table and how we can incorporate that together. How can we increase the diversity of treatments that we can offer in a way that's intelligent, and being able to take parts from both sides and putting them together?
You even talk about recipes. And things that are good for you. And in fact, for that reason, I'll let people know that I'm sitting here having my green mint tea. What's that doing for me?
Well, there's a lot of things. I mean, green tea has a lot of powerful health benefits. One of the couple tenets that I kind of like are basic fundamentals that I do in my practice is, one, what we find in for like depression, anxiety, like any kind of mood disorder, even thought disorders like schizophrenia. The two biggest kind of fundamental issues that we look for is trying to increase and kind of bolster your neuroplasticity, or the growing capacities of your brain. Your brain has different receptors, it's constantly renewing them, different connections with anything. So for instance, you might learn something from this show potentially today. And if that was something that you do a few times, your brain neurons will literally change physically their linkages with each other so that it becomes easier. That's why something becomes a habit where you don't have to really become consciously effortful with it after a while. The brain actually changes and does that. So in order to be more adaptable to the different challenges in our environment, we want to enhance our neuroplastic capacity. So that's kind of one angle. And what we know is for the more like depression, anxiety, and more severity of these psychiatric conditions, there's generally what we found is the reduced growth factors in the brain. And so if we advocate for certain particular habits that boost that, you'll notice that people get better. So in the green tea, there's something called ECGC, for instance, that actually has been shown to improve neuroplasticity. The mint aspects of it also has sort of a calming effect on the body. So they kind of like complement each other in different ways, so that as you get up, the caffeine in green tea, as opposed to say coffee, which is more like almost like caffeine anhydrous, kind of isolated alone because it's been roasted, in green tea, it's kind of linked to these things called polyphenols that create kind of a time release effect on the body. So you don't get sort of this jagged uprise and then this fall and collapse. It's more of a kind of a gentle sloping up and down. So people who have anxiety, who may also still benefit from a little bit of caffeine here and there, may find that green tea with this sort of time release effect on caffeine would be helpful, and it gives them that kind of nice boost. Actually, the matcha green tea that I post on my website, the tea ceremony was based out of the Zen Buddhist tradition, where they would use it just before their afternoon meditation. They didn't want to be jittery, but they wanted that calm alertness to have that. So there's a compound called L-theanine that's in green tea that's a calmative. So when you have these sort of whole like plants and you're using them, you get both usually these sort of complementarity and synergistic effects. So that's part of the reason why I offer these recipes like that.
Your website, drmantz.com. So that's drmantz.com. We say Z, doctor.
Okay.
Just wanted to pass that on.
I just learned that. Maybe my brain will now change to remember that.
I am helping your neurons to exercise.
Much appreciated.
I want to get to the meat of this interview right now. Okay. And that is the what you talk about is interoception. What is interoception?
Sure. So we have our 5 senses that we're all aware of. They are considered, if you were going to categorize them, exteroception, exteroceptive senses. So that's the way we experience our external environment. So sight, sound, smell, taste, touch. And so that's how we experience it, that world. Intero, so internal, ception, receiving, is the way we internally receive our bodily signals in our body and how we experience our body from within. So that it's our, we can call it our 6th sense, and it's our ability to experience the signals and then how we interpret those signals as well, and how we relate and how we react to those signals. So all of that encompasses interoception.
Are you talking about, I'm hungry, I'm tired?
Mm-hmm.
Is that interoception?
Yes, that is part of interoception. The hunger signals that you would get in the core area of your body. If you're fatigued, you're feeling maybe a heaviness in your legs and in your arms. Those two would also be part of the interoceptive process. A toothache, a headache, those kind of things as well.
So when it comes to stress and anxiety, how does that factor in?
So with stress and anxiety, oftentimes what happens is especially people who get it chronically, you'll have these sort of aversive sensational experiences. And what we'll do is oftentimes is like, all right, I feel this sort of like classic symptoms would be sort of like a tightening in the belly. Potentially like your heart rate might start to speed up. And so all of a sudden you're like, I don't like this feeling. And then you will actively try to resolve it in some way, in some way that's usually a distraction or an avoidance strategy, because I don't want to experience this aversive experience. Unfortunately, if the anxiety is being driven because of some sort of maybe thoughts that you're having about, whether it's like your career or whether it's a relationship, it's being generated from internally. So it's not like something is going to imposing. It's not like all of a sudden you're being hunted down by a mountain lion. This is something that's being generated internally. So if you try to avoid what's being kind of generated internally, you're now empowering this sort of threat fear experience by now avoiding it through distraction, and prolongs it and continues it along. And this is one of the reasons why these things like anxiety can have such a chronicity linked to them.
And there are things we can actually do other than avoidance. I mean, could we say, though, that sometimes distraction is good?
Absolutely. Yeah, when used with wisdom and guidance. So what I often do with people, especially with anxiety, is I'll have them rank their anxiety in its range of intensity from 0 to 10. And what I'll say is that we generally learn very well, like some anxiety is actually helpful. I don't want to put that all anxiety is pathological. It's not. Sometimes it could really help and prepare you for certain threats if it's accurate anxiety. When we get into that intensity range between 2 and 7, there's a little bit of activation. We can work with the sensations and process them and use them as signals to help you to kind of create what are the appropriate responses to what I'm feeling in my body. However, if we go above 7, what happens is now the intensity level is going to overwhelm your attentional capacity. So if I'm telling you to try to like sense your body and you're at a level 8 or 9 level anxiety, it's going to be too unstable for you to do that. So in those moments, I often say, go out and do something physical. Let your muscles sort of chew up some of that adrenaline so that you can get yourself back into that sweet spot between 2 and 7 level intensity, so that you can begin to kind of now process those sensations and be able to work with them in a more effective way.
Okay, so let's go over some of these things. I mean, one of the difficulties, though, of course, with anxiety and stress and panic attacks is we tend to describe them as physical ailments. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times we just end up telling the doctor, or when we go into the ER, we're saying, I just don't feel right. Yeah. That is a tough thing to do. So I can see that by what you're talking about, we're actually going to be able to better identify these feelings.
Exactly.
So let's talk then about what sensations am I looking for?
Well, what I would do is I think it would be better if I were to, when I'm working with a particular client, I'll ask them if they're saying, yeah, I'm experiencing anxiety. So one thing, I wrote an article called The Three Amigos of Anxiety, the three kind of patterns that tend to make anxiety worse and make it last longer. One, avoidance. Again, we were just speaking about that before. Two is arrhythmia or inconsistency. Again, this leads to this sort of unpredictability, uncontrollability element that often fuels anxiety. And the third one is ambiguity. I don't know. And when you don't know, your amygdala is kind of like firing because it doesn't know what's going on. And often we know when we are able to actually accurately label an emotional experience, you'll notice that alone will start to bring down, and we see that the power of the amygdala kind of like reduces a little bit. Once we've kind of tagged it accurately, we'll start to feel a little bit more comfortable. So when we are having these experiences, when someone says they're having anxiety, it's very general, it's very vague. Mm-hmm. So what I really want to do is with each person is to know, well, how does your body experience anxiety? And so I want them to then come inside, and immediately, that idea is once they start sensing, we are activating what is known as that parasympathetic nervous system, that rest, digest, relaxation, response, as opposed to what anxiety engenders is more of this fight or flight response, the sympathetic system. Mm-hmm. So we have to, in order to sense our body, utilize that parasympathetic nervous system. So it's automatically starting to shift this balance, because often people with chronic anxiety have an imbalance where their sympathetic is just over dominating the system. So that alone will help.
Yeah, we should point out, we're meant to get anxious. We're meant to have stress. It's our sympathetic nervous system. It's there for a reason. Yes. And then we have the parasympathetic nervous system, which is supposed to balance it out. So literally we have the devil and the angel on our shoulders. And so what happens? What happens when we get into stress and anxiety, and with some people with their parasympathetic nervous system?
Yeah, a couple things is that patterns, oftentimes this could be partly related. It's a big question, so we'll see how far we want to take that. But one is that we learn a lot of kind of behavioral patterns, and belief structures early in our development. So if we were taught by our role models, like certain things, like for instance, we might have had a mother that was also anxious, and our mother maybe drank wine to kind of calm the nerves. So that leaves a very powerful imprint in our own system of how I should handle my particular aversive experience inside my body, even though I may not know that like consciously. By the time I'm now, at the age at which I saw my mom do that, I might be doing the same behaviors and not be fully aware of it. And most people do when they don't feel comfortable. They'll just do something really fast to try to get rid of it. That it's like that instant, there's an instant gratification, but there's also instant relief, rather than saying, well, what's going on here? And we've often been indoctrinated in our culture to ignore our body in general. Sometimes I do my, when I do a presentation on this, I'll ask particular questions about, I'll ask, in the past 24 hours, has anybody not had a worrisome thought regarding their body? And I just sort of contemplate that. In the last 24 hours, have you had not one thought about, what is this? I'm not sure. And then I'll ask, if has anyone in the last 24 hours had a critical thought about their body? And oftentimes, obviously, these are meant to draw like how often our relationships with our body are dictated by what I've seen in my 10 years of clinical experience are three emotions. One, anger towards the body. Two, fear towards the body. Three, disgust towards the body. And it's very rare that people have a healthy relationship with their body. So we're trained in our cultural conditioning, a lot of us are, is to sort of they kind of dissociate from the body, especially in, there are some differences in the sexes as well, where, like where men might be trained like, well, ignore that pain, ignore that signal, why are you being a baby, that kind of things. I mean, that could happen on both sides of the sexes as well. But so we're taught to ignore our body, to kind of push through it, this over reliance on just, using your willpower to kind of go through it and don't be a baby and all these other qualities. And that leaves an indelible imprint in ourselves to not pay attention to our body. So when we experience anxiety and these other aversive kind of symptoms, we go for these sort of quick fixes, whether it's the bottle, whether it's going to the TV, or whether it's going for something in the fridge, something to change our state rapidly, rather than necessarily sort of just being with what is this discomfort, what is going on here, and kind of letting it, just give it some time to kind of maturate and elaborate, so that I can maybe pick up some insight, especially if it's a repeating experience that you can address with.
This is interesting. So you reach for something. Let's say you reach for the bottle, you reach for food, or whatever it is you reach for. What can you do when you get that feeling or that desire? Mm-hmm. Walk me through how I can use that to feel my senses.
Correct. So oftentimes, let's say there's a desire, you're feeling restless, and part of your pattern is to go to the fridge and have, whatever it might be, whether it's a cupcake or a piece of cake, whatever it might be, or ice cream. So instead of, all of a sudden you feel that restlessness coming in again, and is to then bring your attention down into the restlessness itself. Now, for some people, they may need some guidance with this, because initially, oftentimes when you highlight something with your attention, you're going to feel it more. So oftentimes if a person's like, well, I'm going to do this to try to get rid of it, they're often going to be like, if they give their attention to it, they might notice that the intensity actually goes up. So oftentimes when I'm working with clients, I will tell them about that first, because you are now highlighting that, and it's okay. In fact, any change that happens, whether the sensation goes up in intensity or goes down in intensity, or whether it shifts to one side or the other, is a sign that actually it's starting to move. And because oftentimes a lot of these aversive sensations experience, which is sort of like the heart of some of these aversive emotional experiences, are these resistances to it, these tightenings around it, which kind of keep it stuck. So as it starts to move, that's often a good indicator that these sort of things that are resisting it are starting to dissolve subtly, and it allows the movement to occur. So you do have to be a little bit mindful of how, with each person, whether you don't want to have them just jump right into it, because that could trigger them. So we would have to maybe go at a particular rate at which they're comfortable with. But just exploring the sensation itself, like, oh, it's so terrible, it's so horrible. So immediately these judgments are coming out, and interpretation, like, well, I can't stand this. Well, you actually are able to stand this. And so how about we just come with it together and just describe to me, like as if you were a doctor or a scientist, that just inhabited this body of yours and was going to describe the experience. What just describe it to me. So then they might go into, well, I feel like a tightness. Okay, so how's the tightness? Is it sort of also constricting tightness, or is it just sort of a stabilized tightness? So we're building in, we're increasing the granularity and the nuance, so that the person can actually become more and more, the attention itself elaborates the experience, and then you became more and more knowledgeable of what's going on inside of you, just on a purely sensory basis, as opposed to jumping off into this cognitive space of interpretation and judgment.
CBT, meditation, these are all wonderful tools. However, jumping in and using these and think you're going to be the solving everything, the be all and the end all. Well, that's just not going to happen. In fact, you say something in your website that made me laugh. You talk about sense your body, but don't try to sense your body. I'm paraphrasing here, of course, but it actually does make sense. Explain that to me.
Yeah. So this came out a lot from my own experiences when I was starting, because my family has a high genetic load towards anxiety and I would say obsessive tendencies. So we often tend to go up in our head, but we often tend to be fairly sensitive to different sensations in the body. So oftentimes, when I was being trained using these modalities of sensing the body, and when I was going through certain mindfulness training, they do this thing called the body scan, where it's an attentional practice where you sort of go from each body part and you're just sensing.
Yes.
Because I'm kind of like that performance mindset. I'm like, well, I want to do this really well. So you're trying to feel the hand really well, and you're trying to do this. However, that's not helping, because when you're sensing, that's a nervous system capability. You're already sensing. So the only thing we have willful control over is somewhat over our attention and somewhat over our skeletal muscles. You can't make your eyes, if I just told you, come on, just see better, take your glasses off and just make your eyes work better. Or if you were to eat something and you're like, yeah, I have this indigestion, well, just try harder. Make your belly work for you. If you do that, you're just going to get more indigestion. In a similar vein, because all those are controlled by the nervous system, in a similar vein, when you're sensing, it's more like attuning yourself. It's like kind of sensing and receiving and opening and just sort of relaxing this sort of doing mindset and just opening and receiving. And then all of a sudden you just start to notice, oh, yeah, it's actually, I don't have to add that kind of willful effort, because any willful effort that you try is just simply going to add, if anything, muscular tension, which is just going to create more noise, and you're going to have it more difficult to pick up the signal of your body trying to communicate to you through its sensations.
We're going to get into a moment in what to do with these sensations. But you have some exercises, though, that you help people to actually feel and sense their body, sense their feelings. Can you share a couple with us?
Absolutely. I want to take a slight caveat, though, for any of the listeners out there that may have any kind of trauma or potentially think they have trauma experiences. And because you have to be careful when we do some of these body sensing activities, if a person has had a significant trauma or a collection of little traumas, because the body keeps score. And that is to have some wisdom, that is to approach whatever sensations gently, and or I would suggest for people with that kind of history to have someone help them, guide them in this process, because there is the potential for you to kind of go into it too fast, too strong, and re-traumatize yourself in that capacity. So in some ways, what we usually do in that situation is have the person kind of search in their body for an area that feels comfortable, like a place of refuge, or somewhere even externally to kind of put their gaze or a visualization process. And in that way, what we can do is we can toggle the attention back and forth. So the person, if they start to feel the intensity rise above a 7, they can kind of toggle out and kind of hang out in the place of refuge, and then toggle back in. And I call that, pendulating to regulate, and started developing the regulation skills. And
it's important to be honest with yourself.
Absolutely.
It's very important that you're not saying, you know what, maybe it's a 7, maybe it's an 8. I can take it. That's okay. But it's important to be honest with yourself.
Absolutely, for sure. And so then when you're dealing, with the sensation, so I mean, perhaps give me a particular scenario that I think it's easier if we concretize this a little bit into a particular example. I mean, whether it's one in your own life or whether it's someone that you know or anything like that, and I can be a little bit more concrete in how.
It can, it's fairly common with me to worry about the future, to worry, what, maybe I can't do this. Maybe I'm in too deep. Maybe this is just wrong. And I'm talking about unreasonably so. You're thinking this unreasonably so.
Sure.
So yeah, you're there, and it's like, oh my gosh, and it just becomes that downward spiral, right? So let's use that as a scenario where I'm really worried that something I'm doing right now is just not going to pay off, and it's gonna. I just don't think it's going to be good.
Yeah.
for me.
So there's two ways that we could approach that. I might first approach it from the cognitive angle that you're talking about, like the type of thoughts you're having.
And
then,
if I could just add to that, I'm talking about this is a sudden onset. Okay, this is not something that's percolating in the back of my mind. This is just you're sitting there in bed reading or something, and you have this sudden onset of fear, of anxiety.
Yeah,
Right.
perfect. So the sudden onset comes on. First and foremost, I teach my clients and patients to get a sense of what's the intensity level, so that that will dictate what they're going to what strategy would probably work best for them in order to handle that particular situation. If it's above, like we talked about, an 8, then bringing the attention to it at that point would probably not be the most helpful way. And then at that point, you may want to do something that is more active, maybe just get out of bed, just do something more physical, put some music on. Again, that's where the distraction component can be of great use. Okay. And then that allows the attention to come back down, the intensity to come back down into a workable zone. When you're having the worry thoughts, what I often say to people is actually, anytime you're in that kind of intense kind of thinking realm where it's kind of like really taking you over, it's always being driven by a body sensation, some aversive, uncomfortable body sensation. Because oftentimes, if you have those thoughts coming on board, but if your body was completely relaxed, those thoughts wouldn't last, right? They have no place to hang their home. They have no place to hook in. But the reason why they stay is because it's met with an uncomfortable experience in the body, which is the heart that's generating those particular worrisome thoughts. So what I will generally tell people is to trace the worry thoughts back into the sensations that are driving them. Now that takes a little bit of practice and skill to be able to do that, but you can sort of almost feel into the thought. And one thing that I often tell people is that with that little inner voice that you're talking about, is instead of listening to the content, you can kind of slightly pivot your attention to listen to the tone of the voice. The tone is more connected to the emotional quality that's emerging. So the tone will help guide your attention to where you're feeling this worry and fear in the body. And so then you can kind of trace it back, and then all of a sudden you might notice that there's a tightness in your chest, and that your chest is tightening up, and then your heart might be beating a little bit faster than you normally do. So as long as it's staying within that 2 to 7 zone, then you just sort of give your attention to that area of discomfort in the body. And if your mind has this tendency, the attention, to keep jumping off into thoughts, then what I like to do is I call this going elemental on my website. I have an article on it as well. It's one of the first strategies we use, and that is, again, I kind of highlighted a little bit before, is just to then give your attention some nibbles of things that it can sort of describe, but instead of jumping off into interpretations and judgments and the what if compulsion, going back into just describing what is, what's here, what's happening in your chest. Exactly.
What is instead of what if.
Exactly. Yes.
Okay.
Going from concepts, conceptual dominance to a sensorial dominance.
Okay, explain that.
Yeah, so your brain is jumping off into the different thoughts of what if, what's happening. It's kind of like you turned on your virtual reality system in your brain, and it's creating what I sometimes will call daymares. You're having these different, daymares in your system.
And then they can go in 200 different directions.
Absolutely.
And most of which are usually negative.
Exactly. And that 200 that you're mentioning is kind of like what happens oftentimes in anxiety, is that you get this flooding experience where, oftentimes our brain, I call it the brain stack attack, where as you get more anxious, it's like all of a sudden your attentional control starts to lose its capacity. And so you start getting a lot of different thought streams coming in at once, which overwhelms the system. And then that you're just getting more and more agitated at that point.
Yeah, honestly, and if I get this sudden onset, I will feel, like a caged animal, and a desperate caged animal, looking anywhere to get out to do something, and it brings up a word I am hearing, a term I'm hearing more and more and more now, and that is psych ache. And it's such a great term to describe that feeling. Because it's not tangible. It's not a physical pain. It's
Mm-hmm.
abstract in that point. So when I get this psychache, yeah, it does seem like desperation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so again, it takes some time, it takes some skill to develop, but eventually you kind of feel into, you can take that sort of pivot, sense into the tone of the voice that's kind of generating. So that way you're not getting flooded by all the content anymore. You're kind of, and you're not ignoring it either. You're just paying more attention to to the emotional part of the voice that's kind of generating in your head.
Quickly explain tone to me. When you say the tone of the voice, you mean it's intention? Is it?
Yeah, the pitch, the kind of sense of whether it's like pressurized or not, whether it's kind of like, I can talk to you, I can just sort of talk to you in this sort of relaxed tone, and you can kind of see it has more body to
Yeah.
it. It's relaxed. The pace is kind of doing. But if I was to talk like this and be like, oh my God, it's going to be, oh, you better watch out, Kevin. What's going to happen right now? It has this sort of pressure. It's more staccato. It has this sort of choppiness to it. You can feel it. There's a vibration quality too, because obviously that's what sound is. It's vibratory. And so essentially you can actually feel the sounds and be able to let that. So what we're doing is creating a bridge from the cognitions into the sensations so that you can then trace your attention back into what's driving those cognitions in the first place, which are the sensations in the body.
So what do I do with all this? What do I do with this information?
It's a great question. So then what you're doing is that you would then go down, and so you trace that. Let's say you're having that kind of rush of thought. So you trace it now down into, and you notice this sort of tightness in the heart sensation. That seems to be the dominant symptom. And it's not so overwhelming that you can kind of just sort of be with it. So there's many things you can do here. And so you would just sense it, and then you just start to describe what you're experiencing. So I notice some tightness. I notice I can feel my heart beating a little bit more. It's like it's contracting a little bit more. It's a little bit faster. There's some constrictions here. And then just kind of hang with it. Now, this is kind of difficult for the Western mind to accept because it's like, what are you doing? What are you doing? You're just doing nothing. That's not actually what's happening. So your body's generating this fear, and it just sort of seems to pop out of nowhere, right? And like I said, you could always look around. You say, is there anything attacking me right now? Is there a lion coming after me? No. And so that way, in and of itself, it kind of gets you out of this sort of virtual daymare experience and starts to get you back into what is your just sensorial experience. And then you can kind of that can help orient you a little bit more.
I get visions right now, pictures right now of a parent trying to deal with a child who is afraid of the thunder and lightning. Mm-hmm. And I get this feeling of us sort of addressing our own inner child, saying, listen, it's okay. I mean, the thunder and lightning is normal. It's okay. There is no tiger in the room right now that is going to attack you.
Yes, exactly. And so that's part of it as well. You are, in many times, because it is sometimes activating a sort of an old, outdated program that you may have developed during your development. And so your attention, I mean, what is it that we all almost look for ubiquitously is attention. They want open attention. Like when we're kids, we want that attention. People are, we know on Twitter and all the other social media, it's like attention, give me more and more. I mean, now we, obviously profit is driven by attention. So it's a very, very valuable thing to give. So by giving your attention, if you give your attention to your worrisome thoughts, you're empowering them and they will get more power and they keep generating and it becomes a positive feedback loop. As opposed to now you start to give attention back to your body, which is the only thing that can actually process the emotion itself. And it's not something you do by your own willpower. It's something that your body does naturally. It can handle all the emotions. And just a little bit of a tangent here. What's also just to help people who are suffering from anxiety, because I think that's one of the bigger ones. And we're seeing that it skyrocketed ever since lockdowns, started to happen, across both of our countries.
This seems pretty simplistic. You're basically just saying to tell yourself it's okay.
Sort of. I would say that. So what's happening in that moment when you're getting dominated by these worrisome thoughts is that the body is generating a kind of a virtual reality experience of something that's threatening that's about to happen. However, if you give your attention now to these uncomfortable emotions, now that puts the body in an interesting position. It's like, well, I thought there was a threat, but now Kevin's not moving away from it. He's not avoiding it. He's not going in distraction. He's actually just sort of being with it. So now that throws a curveball into this. So normally a threat, he'd be running away from it, but now he's not running away from it. So then well, maybe this is not that threatening, and then all of a sudden, a little relaxation occurs.
So what's happening in our brain? And if we do this over and over and over and over, what's happening?
Well, what is happening? It's actually very fascinating. It goes into is how we currently perceive, how we even perceive the world. Our brain doesn't just see, like we used to think, like right now, like you're looking at a computer screen, that what's happening is that the light is reflecting off the computer screen and going into your eyes, and your eyes are decoding it, and that's how you see. Well, that's actually not our current conceptualization of how we perceive. What is happening is that your brain is anticipating what's going to happen based on prior experiences in a similar context, and there's this sort of prediction that it's doing. There's an expectation, and then there's the incoming sensory information. And what the brain does is then compares these two things, what it from a prior an expectation or even a desired state or what it wants and the actual. And the difference between these two is called the prediction error. And that way, and so then the mind wants to go into, well, how do I close the gap? Because that's what motivates us. For instance, if you had in your mind an expectation, just even if it's not conscious, that the room that you're going to be in right now is going to be between 72 and 68 degrees. So you dress a certain way and everything like that. And all of a sudden you go in there and it's 77 degrees. Well, now your body's feeling a little bit warmer than it expected. So then you have a couple options. There's a gap. The actual was higher than the expected. And how do I close this gap? So there's a couple options you have. You can have an active resolution where you could potentially just take off more clothing, and that way you can kind of adjust the internal signal to close the gap. Or you could be, just sort of like, well, let me just be with this experience for a little bit. And what happens is what we find in neuroscience when that happens, as long as it's not like way outside the range that it would actually be, hurtful to the body. But what happens is it starts to expand our range of expectation. And in that way, you get less and less of these prediction errors. And what they found was, and one of the things is, when we feel well-being, when we feel sort of like the sense of presence, which is this sort of felt sense of being connected to our actual experience, there is very little prediction errors going on. You feel kind of like the sense of flow, like flow states. Things are just happening. You're not getting dinged by, oh, there's something wrong here, or a surprise. Things just sort of kind of flow with it. So by expanding your realm of comfortability, you're going to be less likely to have aversive experiences. So by this, instead of an active resolution where you would take off the chair, this is called a perceptual resolution, which is a way of updating your prior expectation and prediction system, upgrading it to the newer information, which then closes the gap and expands the range of comfortability for you. So you're more likely to experience more and more levels of well-being.
Interesting. I want to talk about the ultimate psych ache, and that is suicide ideations. And sadly, in the last few weeks, last few months, we've seen the numbers tick upwards, and I anticipate that is only going to worsen until we actually see an end in sight to what's going on with lockdowns. This is the ultimate psychic. How do I rationalize with myself, with my brain, that is not the only solution to take my own life?
Sure. So obviously this is a complex and also a delicate area to talk about, and it's much more ubiquitous than we would like to, admit. I think almost a large majority of us have had some period in time where we've thought about killing ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the central tenets first is a willingness to talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
A willingness, because oftentimes when we have those type of thoughts, we start to feel a sense of shame, and shame is a very very destructive emotion most of the time, that because it keeps you from connecting, from reaching out for help. So it's to find a person and connect out that where you can share that thought and experience. And you might be surprised that that person might also reveal that they themselves have had experiences like that at first. So then all of a sudden that sense of isolation, disconnect, which often can prompt feelings like that, all of a sudden there's a shared experience. There's a compassion that can grow because you recognize, actually, I'm not alone with these type of thoughts. And it's okay to have those thoughts. There's nothing wrong with them. Those are natural. It's oftentimes your brain's attempt to solve a problem. I don't feel good right now. I haven't been feeling good. I've been trying all these things and I'm not feeling better. So a sense of hopelessness creeps in. And so then the brain's like, well, a good solution might be to just, end it all. So I don't have to feel this pain anymore. Makes sense. So at first, when I have people who present with suicidal ideation, is we talk about it. I don't try to fix it right away. I'm not trying to make them feel better right away, because that's invalidating their experience. I want to know. I ask more questions about it. I let them sort of expand upon it a little bit more, because there could be different reasons why those thoughts are arising. So just that alone, you can see it in the body language. People start to kind of calm down. It normalizes, which then reduces some of the shame, which is one of the main motivators as to why someone might commit suicide in the first place. So you're already helping the person just by talking about it a little bit more, and then discussing, and then, like I said, and normalizing it. So that's kind of like the first step, is that process of talking about it and being sort of just open, because oftentimes we ourselves might feel uncomfortable because it triggers our own fears of death, and maybe even our own experiences that we may have had suicidal thoughts at one point. So we don't want to feel it, so we immediately want to fix it. If you feel that sort of compulsion, that's because of your own discomfort with the subject matter. So it's oftentimes just when a person can talk to another person about this subject and you see that the other person is actually quite comfortable with it, it's like we resonate with each other. There's a motor resonance. Like for now, like if we're connecting in our conversation, you'll notice that we will resonate. We'll sometimes start to imitate either certain words we use. We'll sort of use it ourselves, or we'll imitate our body language. There's a motor resonance that occurs, which helps to kind of bring about a sense of connection. We go from the I to a we, and that sort of diffuses out even those uncomfortable feelings and thoughts.
It's tough too to separate the result from other options. It closes in. What would be the best, that you're on your own, you have these thoughts, and again, we know that this can be a sensitive subject, and some people can feel there's no other recourse. Believe me, there is. And I encourage anyone who has these thoughts to if they can't reach out to family and friends, to reach out to a crisis line.
Yes.
And I can guarantee you, they're not going to make fun of you. They're not going to judge you. They're not going to call you silly. They're not going to call the cops on you. Mm-hmm. And I think they're going to do more of what you said. They're going to listen. It is what happens the day after, and the day after that, and the day after that. So you've gotten through another day and you were able to convince yourself. What is a good time to sort of re-examine it, visit it, sense it, and what are some of the exercises you could do to help yourself? So,
you had this experience, and now things have cooled down a little bit. And a very famous psychotherapist, Irvin Yalom, used to say the old cliche of strike when the iron is hot. In psychotherapy, it's strike when the iron is cold. So now it's not so heated, so that we can now take a look at it. Like what might have been, what's the patterns? I look at the mind as a different set of current condition patterns that were driven from all your past experiences. They don't define who you are. I mean, they come and go like everything else. And so there's this sort of like openness if you take it that kind of point of view and you sort of look at it from there. So then you can kind of look at, well, what are the patterns that are generating this particular outcome of a thought that's coming up that's saying that I want to kill myself or something like that. So you might want to take a look at what were the antecedents, the triggers that might have led into those particular thoughts. And then oftentimes it's hard to do that if it's that intense. I recommend that's oftentimes where you need whether it's like a friend, a family member, or like you're saying, like crisis helplines, or psychologist, or all of the above, to help you to do that, to be able to look at those sort of issues that might have led you into those kind of thinking and in that direction. So that would be sort of like the first kind of approach. One thing I do want to highlight, though, and that is an experience that often is related to suicide, and that is the feeling of hopelessness. Mm-hmm. So hopelessness is often misinterpreted by the vast majority of us. It's often thought of like when you have this feeling of hopelessness, it's often directed at the self, like I am hopeless, as opposed to when you feel hopelessness in your body, it's never about you, the person. It's about what you're doing. It's saying what you're currently doing right now. If you are using like alcohol, or you're using some other strategy to try to distract, and all you're doing is using distractions to work on these issues that you have, and you keep noticing it's like the wheel of samsara. You keep coming back again and back again, and maybe it's even intensifying. And then the signal that the body gives you, like, that's hopeless. But the hopelessness is what you're doing, not who you are. And that's a very important distinction, so that you can start to look at, all right, what am I doing? What are the patterns of behavior and thought that I'm currently doing that's leading to this particular outcome? And that way you can start to look at the conditioning in your mind that's happening, that comes and goes, and the triggers that tend to trigger it. So that way you can start to think about, come up with insights on how you can start to experiment on different aspects of that to help shift the pattern into a more healthy direction.
What I am doing, not who I actually am.
Correct. Yes, yeah. We're adaptive. We're like a flowing river. We're not statues. We're constantly changing, adapting, and adjusting. So this sort of tag of hopelessness is almost like I'm kind of embedded with this sort of quality for the rest of my life. That's who I am. That's what we call identification. And it's not true, because you're not always feeling hopeless. It comes and goes just like every other feeling and thought that we have in our body. So that's kind of the idea.
I want to leave people on a more positive thought, if I could. And I almost feel like I want to say to you, is it going to be okay? And I don't know what I want to ask. I don't know what I want to ask you. Is what going to be okay? Is it the lockdowns? Is it what's going on in Capitol Hill? Is it whatever? But it just seems like such a general question that our minds and our bodies are constantly asking is, I just need to be told it's going to be okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, the idea is that shit's going to happen.
Yeah.
There's going to be death in our lives. You know, if our lives were completely ideal, then all the people that your loved ones who are older than you will die before you, and then you'll die. You know, if we all died in order, that's what would happen, and that would even be in a kind of quote unquote ideal situation. So there's going to be challenges ahead. The idea is to how I can be present with what is, and learn from what is, and learn from these challenges to develop new skills, new knowledge, new capacities, and new resources. And learning, and I often, see, not to kind of use this word in a sort of to diminish it way, but it tends to activate your creativity, and as to look at it kind of like from a standpoint of a game. This game that's coming on, the different challenges. I have this boss now that comes in, the boss of my worry pattern that comes in and tries to make me think about what if this, what if that. So now I have this boss that's challenging. Okay, how can I learn from that? It's kind of like that boss is like kind of like when I'm doing some sort of squats, I'm going to strengthen my muscles. So now I'm going to strengthen my attentional capacity. to not get stuck with all these sticky thoughts and bring it back into the body. So it's kind of a shift in your perspective, because I don't want people to bullshit themselves. I want them to actually just see what is, and not get into this sort of idea of these sort of overgeneralized, magnified negative views of what could be, because there is a sort of hubris to that idea. That is, if like if I were to ask you, say, Kevin, in December 2019, tell me what you think is going to happen in the year in 2020. What do you think it's going to be like? And you're like, well, I think it's going to be like this for me, and it's going to be like that for the world. And then, then of course, obviously, wow, what a difference. How can we, and now that we've gone through this very intense experience, how sure can we be of our predictions? So that's the thing, is we want to be able to just notice when our mind just sort of jumps into these, these conclusions, and this sort of these very drastic, very kind of hyperbolic kind of thoughts, and being able to just come back to the simplicity, to what is, to what are the challenges that I faced in my life that I thought I couldn't face, and yet I did, because I'm standing here right now, and all those kind of things. So you kind of look at your resourcefulness, your adaptability. So I look at those kind of things, and coming back into the body as to, let me look at what's happening right now. I'm in my room, I'm in my desk, I'm talking to you on a TV screen. Yes, a lot of crazy shit has happened the last couple of days. Right now, how are things? I'm fed, I'm clothed, I'm around. Yeah, it's pretty okay. Yeah, it's okay. And so, and in the moment, it's okay. I do hesitate a little bit whether to project that out into the future, because I tend to kind of want to bring the person back into presence and keep coming back into their capacity for resilience. I mean, just think about your lineage. Like, your lineage for the human people have been on the planet for over 3 million years. You are the end product of 3 million years of evolution on this planet. The vast intelligence that's actually inside your body and incorporates that allowed you all the different trials and tribulations of your ancestors and what they had to go through in order for you to be even sitting here. It's amazing. Mm-hmm. So it is. I bring that kind of idea.
All right. Well, with that, I will leave you with the mantra that Dr. Mantz has given us, and that is for us to sense, to have that sixth sense of our body, mm-hmm. but to just sort of say to our brain, shit's gonna happen. maybe a t-shirt, a hat. What do you think?
I love it.
It's drmantz.com. On Twitter, Michael Mantz, MD. Mantz spelled M-A-N-T-Z or T-Z, if you would prefer, sir. Thank you for this. Will you come back again?
I would love so. I would love to do whatever. I wanted to say something about you in general, and I love the passion. I love the what you're trying to do, because as you're noticing, the need for mental health resources is so great and so overwhelms our current capacity to meet it, that people like yourself, like you're doing the Facebook Live and doing other things. And that's one of the things why I'm doing the things I'm doing, because I want to help out as much as possible, because there's a lot of misinformation out there regarding mental health, and there's a lot of need. So I appreciate what you're trying to do. And anytime, whether it's on your Facebook Live or here, that you feel that it would be helpful and I can make that commitment, I would make myself available.
I very much appreciate it. I always go by the saying, let me do what good I can now, because I shall pass this way but once. So here we are. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
Although this may seem like a revolutionary approach, when you look at it, it uses the same tried and true fundamentals of better mental health. Recognizing your feelings, examining those feelings, being present with your feelings. We feel cold. We know we feel cold, so we take action. We put a sweater on. So it stands to reason that we feel stressed. We know we feel stressed. It's up to us on how we take action. Thanks for joining me. Take care of yourself and take care of each other.
Please consider subscribing to this podcast and also check out the Happy Molecule Extra. at thehappymolecule.com. There you'll find a link to a video version of this episode, be able to join the conversation about mental health, learn about our Facebook Live show, and get a preview of upcoming episodes. You can email us at thehappymolecule@gmail.com. I'm Erin Davis, wishing you good mental health.